I knew my marriage was over 5 minutes after Vanessa Sterling switched from polished English to French and smiled across the candlelight like I was decorative. Not dangerous. Grant did not flinch when she murmured that the board loved a man who looked anchored, and a talented wife, with clean social optics, made investors feel safe. Then he answered in the same easy French, low and careless, promising I did not understand a word, and saying 2 more glasses would make me agreeable enough. The waiter set down champagne. Vanessa touched the stem of my glass, and Grant gave me that smooth little look he used whenever he wanted compliance dressed up as concern. She said they only needed a few photos of me flushed and unsteady to start the unstable wife narrative, and he added that once promotion closed, the divorce would feel inevitable. When Vanessa mentioned the credit line already sitting under my name and told him to get the final tax papers signed on Monday, the room went cold without changing temperature. I placed my napkin beside the plate, pressed one hand lightly to my stomach, and murmured that I needed the restroom before the next course, because my face still looked calm. Inside the marble bathroom, I locked the door, opened my phone, and sent one message to Reed Lawson. I need immediate divorce and asset protection tonight. Then I took a time-stamped selfie under the vanity light, requested a car, and walked out through the service corridor, knowing I had not left dinner early. I had left him exposed. On the ride home, I stopped replaying the French and started replaying my marriage. Because Vanessa had not invented anything at that table, she had only named it cleanly. Grant had spent years arranging me the way luxury hotels arrange orchids in a lobby. Expensive enough to impress, quiet enough not to interrupt the architecture. The evidence had always been there in plain sight, tucked inside polished gestures, careful timing, and that constant pressure to look effortless while making his life appear bigger. Whenever investors, founders, or senior executives floated through town, he wanted me beside him in silk and heels, never over-explaining my work, never talking numbers unless asked directly. He loved introducing me as brilliant, then cut a to-do half a beat later with a laugh about how artists lived on instinct, as if my contracts arrived by charm instead of discipline. When I landed a larger client than he expected, he kissed my forehead, called me his lucky girl, and spent the rest of the night needling the price I charged. He had also become oddly attentive around paperwork, sliding tablets across the kitchen counter while coffee brewed, telling me these were boring household items and initials would do. I remembered how often he wanted my signature fast, how often he softened his voice and murmured, "Trust me, Maddie, I already handled the complicated part." Now, Vanessa's line about the credit already sitting under my name snapped those moments into place with brutal precision, because what I had mistaken for domestic convenience was simply rehearsal. Even the smaller humiliations rearranged themselves once I had the right key, like the way he discouraged me from updating my personal site too prominently under Foster. He said Keller sounded steadier for luxury clients and cleaner for long-term branding. But what he really wanted was my credibility folded neatly into his name. By the time my car turned onto our block, I understood something with a clarity that left no room for grief. I had never been seated beside Grant as his wife, only displayed there as proof he deserved more. I should have known the truth before the French began, because Vanessa Sterling did not look at Grant like a new supervisor evaluating talent. She looked at him like someone checking shared inventory. Her hand brushed the base of his water glass before he reached for it, and he smiled without surprise, the kind of reflex people only have after repetition. When she asked me in English whether consulting kept me fulfilled, Grant answered for me too quickly, saying I liked flexible work because it left room to support his schedule. Then she shifted into French with that sleek, careless confidence of a woman who thought language itself could hide her, and the shape of the dinner changed in one breath. She murmured that the board loved how stable Grant looked with me beside him, polished, gifted, and harmless enough to calm money people, and he rewarded her with the softest grin I had seen all night. When Vanessa added that a wife with my kind of visual polish made his promotion package easier to sell, Grant tipped his glass toward her and said, "I never caught a word once people stopped speaking English." The next line stripped the room bare so fast I felt my body go still just to keep my face from telling on me. Vanessa said all they needed was one messy night, 2 blurred photos, and a whisper that I drank too much under pressure. And Grant answered that I was already halfway there because I trusted him when he poured. Then she mentioned the credit line already opened under my name, told him to secure the final signatures inside those tax planning papers on Monday, and laughed that once the board vote landed, the marriage could be handled cleanly. By then, I was no longer studying either one of them as separate people, because the affair was not the real shock sitting at that table. The strategy was, Vanessa was not some impulsive woman orbiting a married man, and Grant was not a weak husband who slipped into betrayal. They were partners running one neat operation through sex, status, paperwork, and timing. I lifted my napkin, pressed my fingertips lightly against my stomach, and excused myself in a voice so even that neither of them realized I was not leaving to recover. I was leaving to begin. I let myself into the condo alone, left the entry lights off, and walked straight to Grant's office with Vanessa's words about the credit line still cutting cleanly through me. The locked lower drawer mattered now because she had named it, and once a lie gives you its storage location, hesitation becomes the only foolish thing left. I found a screwdriver in the utility closet, forced the cheap brass lock in one hard turn, and pulled open a drawer that looked less like a private space than a staging file. On top sat printed applications for 2 high-limit cards and a personal line of credit, totaling $146,000, each page carrying my name and an electronic signature I had never placed. Under those were scans of my passport, my social security card, and practice sheets where my signature had been copied again and again until my hand had become a tool in someone else's grip. Then I found email printouts between Grant and Vanessa discussing messaging if Maddie spirals. One note, reminding him they needed me cooperative through the board vote, and another flagging Monday for final signatures. The last document was a term life policy worth $750,000, with Grant listed as sole beneficiary, issued less than a month earlier and clipped into a plastic sleeve like something meant to stay pristine. I photographed every page on the floor beside the desk, uploaded the files to a private cloud, forwarded duplicates to my backup email, and returned each sheet exactly where I found it. When Grant came home after midnight, I was already in bed facing the wall, breathing slow beneath the covers while he stood in the doorway long enough to tell me he was checking, not caring. And I understood with perfect clarity that I was no longer sleeping beside a husband, but beside a man who had assigned a dollar value to my name, my credit, and my death. I woke before Grant, started the coffee, and stood at the counter with the calmest face I could manage, while the life insurance policy sat memorized behind my eyes. He walked in rumpled and cautious, asked whether I felt better, and I gave him exactly what he needed to hear. A small smile and a quiet, "Much better." When I asked how dinner ended, he relaxed by degrees, blamed my early exit on bad shellfish, and left for work, believing the only thing I had carried home was embarrassment. The second the door shut behind him, I took my coat, my phone, and the folder of photographs in my cloud, then drove straight to Reed Lawson's office. He studied the forged credit applications, the copied signatures, the policy naming Grant beneficiary, and the emails with Vanessa, then looked up and told me this was no longer just divorce. Reed moved fast, saying we freeze all 3 credit bureaus today, place fraud alerts immediately, preserve every digital trail, and stop talking before they realize their timeline is collapsing. By noon, I had ordered full credit reports, locked my social security file, filed an identity theft report, and forwarded preservation notices to the banks and insurance carrier. Reed arranged a forensic document examiner, prepared emergency papers to restrain asset dissipation, and told me that if Grant sensed panic, he would delete. redirect, and recast me as unstable. So I did the opposite. Because the evidence already in my possession demanded discipline more than drama, and discipline was the one thing Grant had always mistaken for softness. Before I left, Reed tapped the printout where Vanessa wrote they needed me cooperative through the board vote and said the paper trail was strong, but pattern would bury them. He wanted someone from inside the company who could tie Vanessa and Grant together before the dinner, before the forged debt, before the smear they were clearly preparing. I nodded, tucked my phone back into my bag, and walked out understanding that I was not building a case to confront my husband. I was building one to leave him without a clean exit. Reed found Brooke Danner through an old compliance trail, and the next afternoon I met her in a quiet coffee shop just far enough from downtown to feel deliberate. She came in wearing a wool coat she never fully removed, sat with her bag across her lap, and looked at me the way women look when caution has outlived trust. When I told her my husband was Grant Keller and Vanessa Sterling had used my name for debt while planning my public collapse, her jaw tightened. But she still asked, "How much proof do you already have?" I told her about the forged credit, the insurance policy, the emails about keeping me cooperative, and the French conversation over dinner that turned my marriage into a business instrument. Brooke stared at the table for one long beat, then opened her laptop and said, Vanessa always chose the same sequence. Isolate. Reframe. Document selectively. Then label any woman difficult. She pulled up saved emails, calendar invites, and message exports showing Vanessa routing sensitive meetings through Grant months earlier, pushing him ahead of policy, and freezing out anyone who questioned the pattern. When Brooke flagged expense anomalies tied to travel and executive entertainment, she was pulled into closed-door meetings and told she had an issue with tone. Grant was the one who delivered that message, smiling like he was offering professional guidance, while Vanessa recast compliance concerns as personal instability and lack of polish. Brooke clicked open a folder labeled Retention, showed me time-stamped exchanges and access logs, and said she left because they could block her career. But they could not make her delete anything. That was the first moment since the dinner when the room inside my chest stopped spinning. Because Brooke did not hand me sympathy. She handed me sequence. She agreed to sign an affidavit if Reed protected her against retaliation. And I told her he would because paper mattered more than theater now. We left with no embrace. No promises dressed as comfort, only duplicated files. A firm meeting time. And the quiet understanding that Vanessa and Grant had built this pattern long before they ever tested it on me. The strike came before we filed. Exactly the way Brooke's emails suggested it would. Fast. Selective. And ugly enough to stain without needing to prove anything. Cropped photos of me leaving Reed's office and meeting Brooke began circulating through private texts and social circles with captions implying secret meetings, emotional instability, and some humiliating version of marital betrayal. By the time my phone started lighting up, I knew Vanessa had not reacted emotionally to losing control. She had executed the next step in a pattern she had used before. An hour later, Denise Keller stormed into my studio building, already carrying their narrative in her mouth, like it had been rehearsed on the drive over. She called me disgusting, accused me of humiliating her son while he worked himself sick, and raised her voice just enough for the concierge and my junior designer to hear every word. When I told her calmly to leave, she stepped closer, slapped me hard across the face, and snapped that women like me always ruined good men after they had been given everything. My cheek burned. But the sharper sensation came from seeing the concierge freeze and my designer reach instinctively for her phone, because Denise had just turned their smear into witness testimony. I looked at her without touching my face and told her that if she ever put a hand on me again, the lobby cameras and police report would travel with the forged debt her son opened in my name. She lost color so quickly it almost looked medical, then backed away in silence while I picked up my bag, texted Reed from the elevator, and understood that whatever patience Vanessa and Grant had left was gone. That afternoon, Reed moved the timeline up. The packet with the forged applications, insurance policy, Brooks' affidavit, and preservation letters went straight to general counsel, head of HR, and an independent board member before morning. I did not need to answer the smear with noise, because Denise's slap had already done something better. It proved the Keller family panicked the minute their version stopped controlling the room. By the time I reached the company headquarters the next morning, Grant and Vanessa were already upstairs, preparing for the announcement they thought would finalize everything they had built behind my back. I was not there to interrupt some private celebration or force my way into a room where I did not belong, because Reed had already sent the evidence packet overnight, and general counsel had requested my presence directly. So I walked through the lobby beside Reed and Brooke, carrying nothing theatrical. Only my phone, Brooks' signed affidavit, and the credit reports showing $146,000 attached to my name without my consent. When we entered the executive conference room, the first thing I saw was Grant wearing his promotion face, shoulders squared, jaw set, one hand resting near a leather folio like the future had already been handed to him. Vanessa glanced up with that polished half-smile she used when she wanted control to feel elegant. But it slipped the second she recognized Brooke and saw Reed place his case file on the table. General counsel did not raise his voice, did not ask for anyone's feelings, and instead slid copies of the forged applications, the insurance policy, the preservation acknowledgments, and Brooks' affidavit toward the people who needed them. Grant tried first, because men like him always do, saying this was a domestic misunderstanding and I was clearly spiraling under stress. But Brooke opened her email archive before he finished and matched his denials to timestamps. Vanessa moved next and called the dinner conversation harmless executive banter. So I unlocked my phone, placed it flat on the table, and played the French audio where she praised his stable married image, and he promised I understood nothing. The room stayed so still after her own voice described blurred photos, a controlled narrative, and my signature on Monday's tax papers that even Grant stopped performing long enough to hear what he had actually handed me. Then I looked directly at Vanessa and repeated one of her lines back in French, slowly enough that no one could mistake what had happened at that table or who had understood it. General counsel answered before either of them recovered, stating that forged consumer debt, reputational pressure tied to executive advancement, and retaliatory smear conduct were not personal matters but immediate ethics and legal exposures. When security asked for Grant's badge and Vanessa's laptop before the meeting was officially adjourned, neither of them argued, because the title they expected that morning had already been replaced by a chain of custody. After that morning, the collapse moved faster than either of them could manage, because once security collected Vanessa's laptop and Grant's badge, the story stopped belonging to them. The company placed both on immediate leave. Outside, counsel stepped in, and the same polished network that had once rewarded discretion began treating their names like a contamination risk. Grant's banks froze the disputed accounts as the fraud report moved forward, and Vanessa discovered that, in a business built on trust, nobody keeps a strategist whose last play involved forged debt, retaliation, and executive coercion. 3 days later, Denise found me outside my building with no fury left in her face, only exhaustion and that stunned look people wear when status has failed them publicly. She told me Grant was frightened, that prison would destroy him, that families should handle painful things quietly, and I answered that families do not open $146,000 in a wife's name or insure her death for convenience. She stood there for a second as if the facts themselves had weight, then stepped aside without another word, because there was nothing left to argue with once the paperwork existed. Brooks' affidavit helped restore her credibility quickly enough that she was back in serious conversations with employers who cared more about documentation than whisper campaigns. I moved my retainer clients into a new LLC, cut every shared access point, and watched the social math finish what the conference room had started. Grant and Vanessa had not only lost each other under pressure, they had lost the market that made people like them feel untouchable. And that kind of loss does not scream. It circulates quietly until every closed door starts sounding the same. I moved into a quiet place near the lake, changed every password, rebuilt every routine, and let the peace of choosing my own life settle where fear used to live. When Brooke emailed that she had signed with a better company, I cried for the first time, not from pain, but from relief that none of us had stayed small to keep liars comfortable. Thank you for staying with me through this story. And if you have ever had to leave to protect your dignity, I hope you find the kind of love and calm that never asks you to disappear.